first lie was in the food. Velthon would understand that later. At the beginning of the shift, all she had was an incineration order, a sealed log, and the sound of a human child laughing in a room her species had been taught to fear. The order said, "Burn the record." The gallery feed showed Subject 19 teaching her daughter to braid. One instruction came from the highest authority of 14 worlds. The other came from two small hands fumbling with a length of recycled cord. Velthon had spent 41 cycles believing authority, and truth moved in the same direction. By the end of this shift, she would know that truth could sit cross-legged on a quarantine floor, whispering patience to a child, while authority stood outside the door with a torch. She did not open the door yet, but she stopped trusting the lock. The order to incinerate containment log 4471 arrived at the start of Velthon's third shift, encoded in a priority band she had not seen used in 41 cycles. She read it twice. Her chemoreceptors registered the courier's stress pheromones through the sealed door, sharp and metallic. The way a junior aide smells when they have been told something they were not meant to know. She did not open the door. She did not acknowledge the order. She slid the log deeper into the case under her workstation and walked to the observation gallery as if nothing had been asked of her. Below the gallery in Quarantine Bay 7, the human female designated Subject 19 was teaching her own daughter how to braid a length of recycled cord. The child was 4 standard years old. The cord was the only object in the bay that had not been issued by the Biocontainment Authority. Velthon had logged its presence twice and recommended confiscation twice, and twice the recommendation had been overruled by a name on the directorate that she had stopped trusting around the time the order to burn the log arrived. She watched the mother's hands, slow, patient, repeating the same movement until the child's smaller fingers caught the rhythm. Velthon species did not braid. Velthon species did not teach. Knowledge transferred by glandular contact in the first 11 days of life. And after that, an adult either knew or did not, and a child either survived or did not, and there was no third condition called learning over time. She had read the human word in 23 reports, and she still could not feel it in her body. The braid finished. The child laughed. Velthon turned off the gallery feed and went back to her workstation, where the order to incinerate was still waiting unopened. She kept the log. She did not yet know why. She would, before the cycle ended, and the knowing would cost her everything she had ever sworn an oath to defend. The Biocontainment Authority had classified Earth as a Class 4 contagion vector in the year the humans called 2089, and Velthon had been a junior screener then, 22 cycles into a posting she had requested specifically because it was supposed to be quiet. Class 4 meant no contact, no trade, no signal exchange, no observation beyond the sterile orbital ring. Class 4 meant the species was assumed to be carrying a pathogen so adaptive that even passive surveillance risked seeding the network. 3 other worlds carried the same designation. All 3 had been sterilized within a generation of detection. Earth was the only one that had not been, and Velthon had spent 4 decades not asking why. She asked now, quietly, to herself. In the small, unmonitored corner of her office where she had once kept a plant that died, because she had not understood that the human word water required repetition. The log she had been ordered to incinerate covered the first 17 days after Subject 19 had been recovered from the Antarctic Research Outpost in 2104. Velthon had not been the officer of record on that recovery. The officer of record had been her predecessor, a male named Korthon, who shared her bloodline and her caste, and who had died 11 cycles ago of a respiratory failure that the medical division had ruled natural, and that Velthon, who had cleaned out his office, had ruled otherwise. He had left her 3 things: a sealed jar of soil from a world she had never visited, a handwritten note in the old script that said only read the log all the way through, and containment log 4471, which she had not read all the way through, because the first 16 days had been routine, and she had assumed the 17th would be too. She opened the log now. Day 17. She read the entry her predecessor had filed. Subject 19 had a name. The file did not use it. The authority preferred designations because designations could be moved, processed, sealed, and erased without leaving a shape in the mouth. The log used Subject 19. The feeding schedule used Subject 19. The medical panel used Subject 19 and offspring, female, juvenile. But on day 3 of the recovery, according to a marginal note Corthan had written and then scratched through so lightly the scanner almost missed it, the woman had placed one hand on her chest and said, Mara Innes. Then she had touched the child's hair and said, Lena. Corthan had not entered the names into the official register. He had written them once in the margin. Velthan read the 2 names now and felt, absurdly, as if the sealed room had acquired windows. Subject 19 has refused the offered protein supplement for the 4th consecutive meal. When asked why, she stated that the supplement smelled of her dead. I asked her to clarify. She said the protein source had been sequenced from human remains recovered at the Antarctic outpost. She named 3 of them. I have verified her claim against the recovery manifest. She is correct. Velthan set the log down very carefully on the surface of her desk, the way a junior officer is taught to set down a sample that has just registered hot. Her species did not eat their dead. Her species did not feed their dead to others. The protein supplement issued to Class 4 subjects was supposed to be synthetic. She had signed off on the supply requisition for 41 cycles. She had never once asked where the source material came from. She asked now. The internal system answered in under 3 seconds. The protein supplement issued to Quarantine Base 7 had been sourced from a tissue bank operated by the Biocontainment Authority itself, drawn from recovery operations conducted under Class 4 protocols, processed under a designation that translated, in the old script, to waste reclamation. She sat with that for a long time. Her chemoreceptors were not registering anything. She had stopped breathing through them at some point, and she had not noticed. In the gallery below, Subject 19 was singing to her daughter. The song had no translation in Velthan's language. The melody, however, her chemoreceptors registered as a pattern her predecessor had once described in a private note as the sound a mother makes when she has decided not to scream. Velthan opened the next entry in the log. It was worse than the one before it. She read it anyway. By the end of day 18, her predecessor's handwriting had begun to deteriorate, the careful strokes of the old script giving way to a slant Velthan recognized from her own hand on the few occasions she had filed reports while in physical pain. He had written, in that slant, a single line at the bottom of the entry. I have begun to suspect that the founding study was wrong. The founding study, the document on which the Class 4 designation rested. The 43-page technical report submitted in the year humans called 2087 that had identified the contagion vector in the human genome and recommended permanent isolation. Velthan had read the founding study during her certification. Every officer in the authority had read it. It was considered settled science in the way that the existence of stars was considered settled science. To question it was not heresy, exactly. Heresy required a structure of belief to push against. Questioning the founding study was more like questioning whether one's own hands belonged to one's own body. Her predecessor had questioned it, quietly, in his own log, in handwriting that had begun to shake. He had died 11 cycles ago of a respiratory failure that the medical division had ruled natural. Velthan closed the log. She locked it back in the case under her workstation. She walked slowly and without urgency to the gallery, and she stood at the glass and she watched Subject 19 finish the lullaby and lay her daughter down on the issued sleeping mat and cover her with the issued thermal sheet. The mother sat beside the child for a long time after the child had stopped moving, one hand resting on the small rib cage, feeling the rise and fall of it, the way Velthan, in her certification year, had once been taught to feel for the heartbeat of a contained subject before authorizing a procedure. The mother was not a contagion vector. The mother was a mother. Velthan had known this in some buried compartment of her mind for a very long time. She had simply not allowed the knowing to reach the surface, because the surface was where decisions were made, and a decision once made could not be unmade. And the decision she would have to make if she allowed the knowing to surface was a decision that would end her career, her caste standing, her access to her own homeworld, and quite probably, given what had happened to her predecessor, her life. She made the decision anyway. She did not yet know how she would act on it. She would, before the next shift ended, and the acting would begin in a place she had not expected, with a person she had not expected, in a way her species had no word for. The authority had a protocol for officers who began to display what the medical division called containment fatigue. The protocol was not punitive. The protocol was, by the standards of Velthan's species, generous. An officer who reported their own fatigue was reassigned to a low-stress posting, granted a sabbatical of up to 6 cycles, and offered counseling from a senior officer of their own caste. Velthan had administered the protocol 3 times in her 41 cycles. 2 of the officers had returned to active duty within a year. The third had not, and Velthan had not asked why, because asking had not been part of the protocol. She thought about the protocol now. She did not invoke it. Invoking it would have required her to file a notification, and the notification would have been read by the directorate, and the directorate had ordered the incineration of log 4471. And Velthan was no longer prepared to trust the directorate with the knowledge that she was tired. Instead, she did something her training had not prepared her for. She walked down to the airlock outside Quarantine Bay 7, and she keyed in her authorization, and she opened the inner door, and she stepped into the bay without a suit. Subject 19 saw her first. The human female did not move. She did not wake her daughter. She did not call out. She simply looked at Velthan across the small bare room and waited, the way a person waits when they have already understood that whatever is about to happen is not within their power to stop. Velthan stood in the doorway. Her chemoreceptors registered the bay the way they had never been allowed to register it before. The smell of the human female, the smell of the child, the smell of the recycled cord, the smell of the issued thermal sheet, the smell of the protein supplement which she had not, until this moment, fully understood the sourcing of, and which now made her chemoreceptors recoil so hard she had to brace one hand against the doorframe. She did not speak. Her species had no word for what she had come to say. Subject 19 spoke first. Her voice was quiet. Her daughter was still asleep. "You read the log?" Velthan looked at her. "You read all the way through?" Subject 19 said. Velthan looked at her. "He told me you would," Subject 19 said. "Eventually. He said you were slow, but you were honest. He said honesty in your people is rare and dangerous, and that it would take you a long time, but that you would get there. He told me to wait." Velthan, who had never in her life been described as honest, who had thought of herself as merely procedural, who had administered a quarantine for 41 cycles without once asking what was inside it, sat down on the floor of the bay because her legs would not support her weight any longer. Subject 19 said, "Did you bring anyone with you?" Velthan shook her head. She had learned the gesture from human recordings. Her species did not shake their heads. They tilted their entire upper body, which read on human cameras as a kind of bow, and which had been mistranslated for decades as deference. It was not deference. It was the gesture her species made when they were preparing to refuse an order they had been given by someone they had once trusted. She tilted now, on the floor of Quarantine Bay 7, in front of a human female whose daughter was sleeping 6 paces away, and she refused, in her body, the order she had been given that morning to incinerate the log. Subject 19 watched her tilt. Then the human female did something Velthan had not been prepared for. She crossed the bay. She knelt down in front of Velthan, and she placed one hand, very gently, on the side of Velthan's face, where the chemoreceptors were thickest, where the smell of her was strongest, where Velthan's training had told her for 41 cycles that the contagion would enter if it ever entered. Nothing entered. Subject 19 said, "He died holding the same log you're holding. He died trying to give it to you. I don't know if you know that." Velthan had not known that. She did now. She would carry the knowing for the rest of the cycle, and the carrying would shape every decision she made after. And the first decision she made was to stand up in the bay, with the human's hand still on her face, and to say, in the small voice her species used for the things that mattered most, the only sentence she had been able to assemble in the long walk down from her office. "I am going to break the doctrine." Subject 19 took her hand away. She looked at Velthan for a long time. Then she said, "Good. He said you would." The directorate of the Biocontainment Authority met every 14 cycles in a circular chamber on the 3rd orbital platform, and Velthan had been a junior delegate to that chamber once 29 cycles ago, when she had still believed that her caste's place as the chamber was a privilege earned by competence, and not, as she now understood it to be, a leash. She was not a delegate any longer. Her caste had risen since then, and she had risen with it. And the directorate now included 2 of her cousins and 1 officer who had served under her predecessor and who had attended her predecessor's funeral and who had, Velthan now suspected, signed the order that had made the funeral necessary. She walked into the chamber 4 cycles after the conversation in the bay. She had not slept in any of those cycles. She had spent them in the bay with Subject 19, learning. The human female had taught her 3 things: how the founding study had been falsified, who had falsified it, and why. She did not yet understand the human concept of evidence. Among Velthan's people, evidence was what survived procedure. A thing became real when the right office received it, stamped it, and moved it into the correct channel. Subject 19 had been living below the gallery for years. Her daughter had learned to walk under sterilized lights. Korthan had written a log. None of it had become real because the procedure had been designed to keep reality from arriving. Humans, Mara Innes told her, had a different habit. When the door is locked, Mara said, you start teaching the child what happened. When the paper is burned, you tell the story twice. When they take the names out of the record, you put the names into a song. Velthan looked at the cord in Lena's hands. Is that why you braid? Mara looked down. No. We braid because her grandmother did. Not everything is resistance. Some things are just how a person stays a person long enough to resist later. That sentence would outlive the authority. The founding study had been falsified by a small committee within the authority's medical division. In the year the humans called 2086, after the committee had reviewed 12 years of preliminary contact data and concluded that humans were not a contagion vector at all, but were, in fact, a species whose immune response to alien microbiology was so robust that contact with them would, over the course of a generation, dramatically reduce the mortality of the authority's own population. From a class of respiratory pathogens that the authority had been quietly losing officers to for 2 centuries. The committee had also concluded that humans, if integrated into the authority's economy as equals, would compete successfully with the authority's 3 dominant castes for resources, status, and political influence. The committee had weighed the medical benefit against the political cost. The committee had chosen the political cost. The committee had falsified the study. The committee had recommended Class 4 designation. The committee had, in the 4 decades since, quietly authorized the deaths of 3 other Class 4 species who had been less politically inconvenient and more bureaucratically deniable. Earth had been preserved because Earth was useful as a research subject. Subject 19 and her daughter were not contained. They were farmed. Velthan walked into the chamber. The directorate looked at her. The officer who had served under her predecessor did not meet her eyes. She did not address the directorate. She did not present credentials. She did not request the floor. She placed containment log 4471 on the central table. Beside it, the supply requisitions for the protein supplement. Beside that, the falsified pages of the founding study with her predecessor's annotations in the margins. And beside that, last, a small jar of soil from a world she had never visited that her predecessor had left her 11 cycles ago. No one in the chamber said the word child. That was the first thing Velthan noticed once she had placed the log on the table. They said subject. They said vector. They said Class 4 asset. They said foundational stability and caste transition and managed disclosure. They said 14 worlds as if a number that large could crush 2 names small enough to fit in a margin. Velthan let them speak until the room had built its familiar wall of useful abstractions. Then she opened the log to the page with the scratched-out margin note. Mara Innes, she said. The chamber went still. Lena Innes, she said. Her elder cousin closed his eyes, and Velthan understood that he had known the names before she spoke them, that he had kept them somewhere private and had never allowed them to become procedure. Pity moved through her and left anger behind. The doctrine did not contain them, Velthan said. That is one of the ways I know the doctrine is false, she said. I am Velthan, senior officer of Quarantine Bay 7, and I am withdrawing my certification from the founding study, and I am requesting that the directorate explain to me, in the presence of this log, why my predecessor died. The chamber was quiet for the length of 3 breaths. Then one of her cousins, the elder one, the one who had taught her how to hold a writing implement in the old script when she was a child, said very quietly, "Velthan, sit down. You are tired. We will arrange the protocol." Velthan did not sit down. She said, "I am not invoking the protocol. I am not tired. I am asking a question. I will ask it again. Why did my predecessor die?" The officer who had served under her predecessor finally raised his eyes. His chemoreceptors were giving off the same metallic stress pheromone the courier had given off 4 cycles ago. Velthan registered it without comment. He said, "He was going to do what you are doing now. He was going to walk into this chamber and put that log on this table and ask the same question you have just asked. He did not get the chance. I want you to understand that the people who stopped him are still in this chamber. I want you to understand that I am one of them." Her elder cousin closed his eyes. The officer continued, "I am telling you this because I have spent 11 cycles regretting it, and because I do not want to spend any more, and because the price of telling you is going to be paid by me, not by you, and I am at peace with that. I am asking you, before the directorate moves against you the way it moved against him, to consider what you intend to do with the log, because if you intend to publish it, you should know that publication will end the authority. Not reform it, end it. The economic order of 14 worlds rests on the labor of the castes that the founding study elevated. If the study falls, the castes fall, and if the castes fall, the worlds do not survive the transition. The committee did not falsify the study because they were cruel. They falsified it because they were afraid. I am asking you whether you are prepared to be braver than they were." Velthan looked at him. She thought of Subject 19's hand on the side of her face. She thought of her predecessor's handwriting, sloping across the 18th day of the log. I have begun to suspect that the founding study was wrong. She thought of the small jar of soil from a world she had never visited. She said, "I am not asking you to be brave. I am asking you to be accurate. The accuracy is going to cost what it costs. I am prepared to pay my share." Her elder cousin opened his eyes. There was something in them Velthan had never seen before. She did not at first know what to call it. Then she remembered the word the humans used. He looked, she realized, proud. He said, "Then you should know something, Velthan. Your predecessor did not die. Your predecessor is alive. He is in a medical facility on the 4th platform. He has been in a coma for 11 cycles, induced and maintained. The directorate has not killed an officer of our caste in 900 years. We have done worse. We have allowed them to be useful to us in their silence. I want you to bring him back. I want you to read him this log. I want him to know that he was heard, and then I want you and him to do what neither of us could." Velthan sat down then. She had not planned to. Her legs simply made the decision for her. The chamber did not move against her that day. It would, within the cycle, and the moving would shape the institutions of 14 worlds for the next 200 years. The medical facility on the 4th platform smelled, to Velthan's chemoreceptors, like the inside of the jar of soil her predecessor had left her. She had not understood the smell before. She understood it now. He had been keeping a record of where he intended to go, in the small private way her caste sometimes did, when a posting had run too long and the body began to ask for somewhere it had never been. The soil was from a moon her predecessor had never lived to visit. She placed the jar on the floor beside his bed. He was older than she remembered. 11 cycles in induced coma had aged his chemoreceptors. The skin around them had thinned, and the pigmentation had paled, and the small fine hairs that her caste used to read the chemical fields of close family had receded almost to the bone. She sat beside him for a long time before she spoke. She read him the log, all of it. The first 16 days, which were routine, and the 17th, which was not, and the 18th, in which his handwriting had begun to slope. She read him the page where he had written, "I have begun to suspect that the founding study was wrong." She read him the page after that, which she had not allowed herself to read in her office 4 cycles ago, the page where he had written, in handwriting that no longer sloped but that had recovered, somehow, the steadiness of his certification year, "I am going to do something about it. I am going to put the log on the table. If I do not come back from the chamber, my cousin will find this entry. She will know what to do. She always has. She had not always. She had been slow. He had been right about that. She had been honest, eventually, and she had gotten there, and she said the only thing she could think to say, in the language, her species reserved for the people who had shaped them. "You were right about me," she said. "It took me 41 cycles. I am here now. We are going to finish it." The medical instruments registered no change in his readings. She had not expected them to. She had not come for a response. She had come because there was a thing her species did very rarely, in the presence of those they owed the most to, that she had owed him for 11 cycles and had not, until this moment, been in a position to perform. She placed her hand on the side of his face, where the chemoreceptors were thickest, the way Subject 19 had placed her hand on Velthan's. Her species did not do this. Her species did not touch the dying. It was the gesture Subject 19 had given her, and Velthan was returning it, because it was the only gesture in the universe that meant what she needed to mean. The medical instruments did not register that either, but the man in the bed, very faintly, beneath his closed eyelids, moved, not toward consciousness, not toward speech, toward her hand. The smallest leaning of the face into the palm, the smallest possible registering by a chemoreceptor that had been dormant for 11 cycles, of a person it had been waiting for. Velthan kept her hand there for a long time. When she left the medical facility, she walked back to Quarantine Bay 7 and she opened the inner door, and she told Subject 19 that her predecessor was alive, and that she was going to bring him out of the coma, and that the directorate was going to permit it because she had given the directorate a reason to permit it, and that the reason was that she had agreed not to publish the log directly to the human population on Earth. Subject 19 listened. Then she said, "What did you agree to instead?" Velthan said, "I agreed to publish it to the population of the authority, in the old script, with my predecessor's name on it, and my name on it, and the names of every officer who has served in this bay since 2089, and with the names of the 3 other Class 4 species, whose worlds we sterilized. I am going to read those names into the record of the Directorate, and I am going to ask the Directorate what restitution looks like for a species that has already been ended." Subject 19 was quiet for a long time. Her daughter had woken and was watching them both from the sleeping mat, the small dark eyes moving between her mother and Velthan with the steady attention. Velthan had come to understand was how human children learned. Subject 19 said, "Restitution does not look like anything for a species that has been ended. That is the whole point of ending them. You cannot make it right. You can only refuse to do it again." Velthan nodded. She had been practicing the gesture. She was getting better at it. She said, "Then I am going to read the names anyway, so that the chamber has to sit in the same room as them, so that the next directorate cannot pretend they did not know, so that the institutions we build after this are built by people who heard the names spoken in the old script by an officer of the caste that elevated itself on the lie, in the presence of the species the lie was told about." Subject 19 looked at her for a long time. The child looked at her. The recycled cord lay on the floor between them, half-braided, abandoned in the moment Velthan had first opened the door without a suit. Subject 19 said, "He told me you were honest. He didn't tell me you were going to be like this." Velthan said, "I didn't know I was going to be like this either." Subject 19 picked up the recycled cord. She walked across the bay. She placed it in Velthan's hand. She said, "Then take this, so that when you stand in the chamber, you have something in your hand that we made, so that when you read the names, you read them holding something a human child taught, a human mother taught a quarantine officer to hold, so that the chamber sees it, so that the next chamber sees it, so that 200 years from now, when somebody writes down what happened, they write down that you held a cord." Velthan took the cord. She held it for the rest of the cycle. She would hold it again, 6 cycles later, in the chamber, when she stood with her predecessor at her side and her elder cousin behind her, and the officer who had confessed beside him, and read the names of the 3-ended species into the old script in a voice her caste had never heard her use. And the chamber, which had not been silenced in 900 years, was silenced. The Biocontainment Authority did not survive the reading. It was not reformed. It was dissolved by the General Assembly of the 14 worlds within 2 cycles of the reading, and the economic collapse the officer in the chamber had warned of did, in fact, occur, and Velthan's caste did, in fact, lose the standing it had held for 900 years, and the worlds did, in fact, struggle through a transition that lasted 41 cycles and cost more lives than the historians of the period were ever fully able to count. The transition did not kill the worlds. The historians, when they wrote about the period, did not call it the collapse. They called it the redding. They wrote that the redding had been performed by Senior Officer Velthan of Quarantine Bay 7, who had been an undistinguished officer for 41 cycles before the redding, and who had, after the redding, refused all ceremonial elevations and all offers of public office, and who had returned instead to Quarantine Bay 7, where she had served for the remainder of her active life as the liaison between the human population of Earth and the new joint assembly that had replaced the authority. They wrote that she had held a cord in her hand throughout the redding. They wrote that the cord had been braided by a human child named Mira, who had been 4 standard years old at the time, and who had grown up to be one of the 7 founding members of the Joint Assembly, and who had, when she was very old, given a single interview to a historian who had asked her what she remembered of the bay. Mira had said, "I remember her face when my mother touched it. I remember she didn't pull away. I remember thinking, even then, that something was happening that wasn't supposed to happen. My mother told me later that the not supposed to happen was the whole point. That the things that are supposed to happen are the things that built the bay. That the things that aren't supposed to happen are the things that take the bay apart. I have spent my life trying to make more of the second kind of thing happen. I learned how from her, from both of them." The historian had asked Mira if she had ever seen Velthan again after the bay. Mira had said, "Once, at the end, she came to the assembly chamber on the day my mother died. She brought the cord. She put it in my mother's hand. She did not speak. I did not need her to. I have the cord still." The historian had asked Mira if she would show it. Mira had refused. She had said, "Some things were made to be held, not displayed. The cord is one of them. Velthan was one of them. My mother was one of them. I hope when I am gone that someone will remember to say that I was one of them too." The historian had written that down. It is the last entry in the official record of the redding. The official record does not say what happened to the jar of soil. The unofficial record, kept by Velthan's cousin in the old script, says that she returned to her predecessor with the jar 3 cycles after he had been brought out of the coma, and that the 2 of them traveled together to the moon the soil had come from, and that they spent a single standard year there, and that when they returned, the predecessor went into private life, and Velthan went back to the bay, and neither of them spoke publicly of the moon again, and that her predecessor died 9 cycles later, in his bed, of natural causes, with Velthan present, and that she placed the jar of soil in his hand before the body was prepared. The unofficial record does not say what was on the moon. It says only that Velthan, when she returned, was different. It says she had begun to use the human gesture of nodding instead of tilting, and that she continued to use the human gesture for the rest of her life, even in formal settings, even in the presence of the assembly, even when she was elderly and tired and had earned the right to use whatever gesture she pleased. It says she nodded a great deal. It says she said, often when asked why, that she had learned the gesture from a woman who had taught her how to be honest, and that she was not going to forget the woman, and that the gesture was the smallest possible way to keep from forgetting, and that she had developed, over the years, a preference for the smallest possible ways. It says, last, that, on the day she died, in her quarters on the orbital platform above Earth with the cord still in her hand, she asked the attending physician to send a single message to the Joint Assembly. The message was 11 words long. It said, "I held the line for 41 years. Then I broke it." The Assembly recorded the message. The Assembly read it into the official record. The Assembly observed a standard period of silence and resumed its work. The cord was given to Mira, who was, by then, in the final cycle of her own life, and who held it in her hand for the remainder of her days, and who, when she died, asked that the cord be returned to Quarantine Bay 7, which had by then been preserved as a historical site and was visited annually by delegations from the 14 worlds who came to stand in the small bare room where a human mother had taught a quarantine officer how to put a hand on the side of a face. The cord is in the bay still. It is the only object in the room that is not behind glass. Visitors are permitted to hold it. They are asked before they hold it to consider what they have come to break and what they intend to hold in its place, and whether they are prepared to pay what the breaking will cost. Most of them, the docents say, put the cord back down without holding it. Some of them hold it. The ones who hold it are remembered. The Bay keeps a record. It is the only record the Bay still keeps. The directorate is gone, and the authority is gone, and the founding study is gone, and the casts are gone, and the protein supplement is gone, and the officer who confessed in the chamber is gone, and Velthan is gone, and her predecessor is gone, and Subject 19 is gone, and Mira is gone, and the moon the soil came from has been doped to general settlement and named in the old script for a word that translates roughly to the place an officer went when she finally allowed herself to rest. The record the Bay keeps is the names of the people who held the cord. It is updated by hand in the old script by a docent who is selected by lot from among the descendants of Quarantine Bay 7. It contains, as of the last entry, 471,000 names. It is, by every standard the 14 worlds use to measure such things, the most read document of the post-authority period. It is also, by every standard those worlds use, the shortest. Each entry is a single name. There are no notes. There are no biographies. There are no commendations. There are no rankings. There is only the name and the date it was added, and a small space beside each name where the docent records, in a script no one outside the Bay is ever taught to read, what the person who held the cord said when they put it back down. The docents do not share what is in that space. It is the smallest possible way to remember. Velthan would have liked it. The historians believe she would have nodded. If you have ever wondered what it costs to be the person who finally tells the truth, the person who walks into the chamber that has lied for 900 years and puts the lie on the table and reads the names of the dead in the language the chamber speaks. Then you have wondered the question this story was built to ask. Subscribe, because the next one we are telling is about the officer who confessed beside her, and what he carried, and what it cost him to carry it, and the carrying is its own kind of story. There is one more thing before we close. The unofficial record, which is kept by Velthan's cousin's descendants in the old script, includes a single entry that does not appear in the official record. It is dated 9 cycles after the reading. It says, in the careful old script that Velthan had been taught to use as a child, that her cousin came to visit her in the Bay late in the cycle when the Bay was empty, and that he asked her, in the small voice their caste reserves for the questions that matter most. Why she had not, in the chamber, asked the directorate what restitution looked like for the predecessor they had nearly killed. Velthan had thought about the question for a long time. She had answered, in the same small voice, that restitution had not been hers to ask for. She had said that restitution belonged to the person who had been wronged. She had said that her predecessor had asked her, 6 cycles after the reading, what restitution he wanted from the directorate, and that he had told her his answer, and that she had carried the answer to the directorate, and the directorate had granted it. Her cousin had asked what the answer was. Velthan had told him. He had written it down, in the old script, in the unofficial record, and he had closed the entry, and he had not added a single word of commentary, because the answer did not need commentary. It was, like the message Velthan would later send to the assembly on the day she died, 11 words long. It was, like the cord the smallest possible way. It said, let me go back to the Bay. Let me sit with her. The directorate had granted it. He had gone back. He had sat with Subject 19 for the rest of her life. In the small bare room where Velthan had once opened the inner door without a suit, and where a human mother had once placed her hand on the side of an alien officer's face, and where a recycled cord had once been half-braided and then abandoned and then carried into a chamber and then placed in the hand of a child and then returned, decades later, to the room it had been made in. He had sat with her. He had not said much. Subject 19 had not needed him to. She had said once, near the end of her own life, to the docent who would later become the first keeper of the cord, that she had spent her years in the Bay teaching 3 things to anyone who would learn them. She had said the things in the order she considered them important. She had not, the docent noted, ever changed the order. She had said, first, that you should always finish what you start braiding. She had said, second, that you should always put your hand on the side of a face when the face has done something it was not supposed to do. She had said, third, that you should always read all the way through. The docent had written the 3 things down. They are carved, now, in the old script. above the door of Quarantine Bay 7. They are the first thing every visitor reads. They are the last thing every visitor reads. They are the only thing in the bay that was written by a human. The docents say that visitors, when they leave, sometimes pause at the door and read the three things one more time, and that the visitors who pause are the visitors who, more often than not, come back the following year, and the year after that, and the year after that. The docents have, over the centuries, developed an unspoken understanding among themselves about these visitors. They do not speak of it, they do not record it, but they watch for it. They know what it means. It means the visitor is going to break something. They do not know what. They do not need to. They have by now learned that the breaking is the whole point, and that the bay was built, in the end, not to contain but to release, and that every person who walks out of the door carrying the weight of the three things is in their own small way carrying out the work that began when an officer named Velthon opened an inner door without a suit and sat down on a floor and listened to a human female say 6 words that ended an empire. You read all the way through. If you held the cord, what would you break?